Marcus Chen had always prided himself on being prepared for anything. As Earth's lead xenobiologist and first contact specialist, he'd spent 15 years studying theoretical alien physiology, psychology, and cultural patterns. He'd run countless simulations, written protocols, and even practiced greeting sequences in 17 different mathematical languages. What he hadn't prepared for was finding an unconscious alien woman in his backyard garden at 3 a.m. The crash had been subtle, no dramatic explosions or burning wreckage, just a soft thud that woke him from restless sleep. Through his bedroom window, he'd seen a strange blue glow emanating from between his tomato plants. His first instinct was to call the authorities, but something made him hesitate. Perhaps it was the way the light pulsed gently, almost like breathing. Or maybe it was the complete absence of any threat indicators his trained mind usually catalogued. She was beautiful in an otherworldly way that made his breath catch. Her skin held an opalescent quality that shifted between pale silver and soft blue under the moonlight. Delicate ridges traced elegant patterns along her temples and down her neck, disappearing beneath what appeared to be a form-fitting suit made of some material that seemed to absorb and reflect starlight. Her hair, if it could be called that, moved independently like underwater kelp, each strand a deep midnight blue that caught and held the garden's shadows. Marcus knelt beside her, his medical training overriding his amazement. Her breathing was shallow but steady, and when he checked for a pulse at her wrist, he found a rhythm that was almost but not quite human. 2 quick beats followed by a pause, then 3 more. Her skin was warm to the touch, warmer than human normal but not fevering. Most remarkably, she seemed to be healing before his eyes. A cut on her forehead was visibly closing, the edges knitting together with tiny sparks of that same blue light. The responsible thing would have been to contact the Global Defense Initiative immediately. First contact protocols were clear. Any extraterrestrial presence was to be reported within 30 minutes of discovery. But something about her vulnerability stopped him. She looked so small lying there among his vegetables, and the peaceful expression on her face suggested she wasn't a threat to anyone. Instead, Marcus carefully lifted her. She was surprisingly light, as if her bones were hollow like a bird's, and carried her into his house. He'd converted his spare bedroom into a medical bay years ago when his elderly father had lived with him, and though his father was gone now, the equipment remained functional. He placed her on the examination bed and began running basic scans. The results were fascinating and impossible in equal measure. Her cellular structure was similar to human, but with modifications that suggested adaptation to a higher gravity world and possibly a different atmospheric composition. Her bone density was remarkable, explaining how she could be so light yet clearly strong. Most intriguingly, her neural activity showed patterns he'd only seen in theoretical models, as if her brain operated on frequencies humans couldn't naturally access. She woke 6 hours later, as dawn light filtered through the medical bay windows. Marcus was dozing in the chair beside her bed when her eyes opened, large, expressive eyes that held flecks of gold swimming in deep violet pools. For a moment, they simply stared at each other across the vast gulf of species and understanding. Then she spoke, and her voice was like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "Thank you for your kindness." Earth-human Marcus Chen, he nearly fell from his chair. "You know my name? You speak English?" She sat up carefully, her hair like appendages moving to frame her face in what he was beginning to recognize as expressions of emotion. "Your species broadcasts much information into space. We have been listening for many of your years. Your name appears in scientific publications. You are known among my people as one who seeks understanding rather than dominance." "Your people?" Marcus leaned forward, his scientific curiosity overriding his shock. "Where are you from? How did you get here? Are you injured? Do you need medical attention?" She tilted her head in a gesture that was remarkably human-like. "I am Lyrelai of the Andorian Collective. I came here in a small scout vessel that malfunctioned during what you would call a reconnaissance mission. My injuries are healing well thanks to your care." She paused, her golden-flecked eyes studying his face intently. "But I have a confession to make, Marcus Chen. My crash was not entirely accidental." Marcus felt his heart rate spike. "What do you mean?" "My people sent me to observe your world and report back on human readiness for contact. But I have been watching Earth for 3 of your years, focusing particularly on individuals like yourself. Scientists, peacekeepers, those who build rather than destroy. The more I learned about your species, the more I wanted to meet one of you personally. Her cheeks darkened with what might have been embarrassment. So when my ship developed minor engine troubles, I may have guided it toward your location rather than attempting immediate repairs. You deliberately crashed here? Marcus stood up, pacing to the window and back. Do you have any idea what this means? The protocols, the procedures. There are people who need to know about this. This is the most significant moment in human history. Lyralei's expression grew solemn. Yes, I understand the magnitude. But Marcus Chen, I must ask something of you that may seem strange. I wish to stay here with you for a period of time before any official contact is made. There are things about my mission, about my people's intentions that are more complex than simple reconnaissance. Marcus stopped pacing. What kind of things? My people face a great crisis. Our homeworld is dying, and we seek a new place to call home. Earth isn't suitable, but we would not take it by force. We wish to know if humans would welcome us as neighbors, as friends, perhaps even as family. She stood from the bed, moving with fluid grace to stand before him. I volunteered for this mission because I believe in the possibility of our species coexisting. But I need to understand humanity not through distant observation, but through living among you, learning your true nature. Marcus felt the weight of her request settling on his shoulders like a heavy cloak. You're asking me to hide you from my own government, from my own species. You're asking me to make a decision that could affect the entire future of human-alien relations. I am asking you to trust that some discoveries are too important to be filtered through committees and protocols. Lorelei said softly, I am asking you to help me learn what it means to be human, so that when the time comes for our peoples to meet officially, it can be as equals rather than as strangers. Marcus looked into her alien yet somehow familiar eyes and realized his quiet life of research and solitude was about to become something far more complicated and dangerous than he'd ever imagined. The first week of living with an alien proved to be nothing like the science fiction movies had prepared Marcus for. Lorelei was endlessly curious about everything, from the way his coffee maker worked to why humans kept plants inside their homes for decoration. She approached each new discovery with the enthusiasm of a child. Yet her questions revealed an intelligence that often left Marcus feeling intellectually challenged. Your species creates art for no survival purpose, she observed on the third day, standing before a painting his sister had given him years ago. It was a simple landscape of the Colorado mountains, nothing special, but Lorelei studied it for nearly an hour. Among my people, all creation serves function. Beauty is efficiency perfected. But this, she gestured at the painting with one graceful hand. This serves only to please the eye and stir emotion. How wonderfully wasteful. Marcus couldn't help but laugh. Wasteful isn't usually how people describe art. Oh, but it is the most beautiful waste. Lyralei's hair-like appendages shimmered with excitement. To spend time and resources on something purely because it brings joy. This tells me more about humanity than all our surveillance could. My people would call this inefficient, but I think perhaps we are the ones who have been inefficient in forgetting how to create beauty for its own sake. These conversations became a daily occurrence. While Marcus worked from his home laboratory, Lorelei explored his house and the surrounding neighborhood with an anthropologist's eye. She was careful to avoid direct contact with other humans, using a perception filter from her damaged ship that made people's eyes slide past her as if she belonged there. But she watched them constantly, taking mental notes that she shared with Marcus each evening. Your neighbor Mrs. Patterson feeds stray cats despite complaining about them, she reported one night over dinner. She pretends annoyance when they gather in her yard, but I observed her purchasing specialized food for them. Why do humans often hide their compassion? Marcus paused with his fork halfway to his mouth. I think sometimes we're afraid that caring too much makes us vulnerable. If people know you have a soft heart, they might take advantage of it. But surely the joy of caring outweighs the risk of betrayal? You'd think so, wouldn't you? Marcus found himself really considering the question. I guess fear makes us cautious in ways that might not always be rational. Lyralei's expression grew thoughtful. Fear. Yes, my people know this emotion well. Perhaps too well. It drives many of our decisions now that our world faces extinction. This was the first time she'd mentioned specific details about her people's crisis, and Marcus sensed an opportunity to learn more. What's happening to your homeworld? Her opalescent skin dimmed slightly like a light being turned down. Our sun is dying ahead of all projections. Solar storms have increased in frequency and intensity, disrupting our atmosphere and poisoning our soil. We have perhaps 50 of your years before our world becomes uninhabitable. She set down her fork and looked directly at him. My people are desperate, Marcus. Desperation makes even peaceful species consider options they would normally find abhorrent. What kind of options? There are factions among the Andorian collective who believe we should simply take what we need to survive. They see Earth's relatively small population and vast resources and think conquest would be efficient. They are not evil, merely practical in the face of extinction. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. And the other factions? They believe, as I do, that cooperation yields better results than conquest. But they require proof that humans would be willing partners rather than obstacles to be overcome. Lorelei reached across the table and placed her warm hand over his. This is why my presence here is so important, Marcus. I am gathering evidence that humanity is worth preserving, worth working with, worth saving alongside ourselves. The weight of responsibility that had been growing heavier each day suddenly felt crushing. You're not just learning about humans for academic purposes. You're essentially conducting a trial to determine whether my entire species lives or dies. Not dies, Lorelei said quickly. My people are not monsters. But whether humanity remains free to choose its own destiny, or whether it becomes a protected population, under Andorian guidance. She squeezed his hand gently. I know it is a terrible burden to place on you, but please understand, I chose you specifically because your research, your writings, your entire approach to xenobiology suggests someone who believes in the possibility of peaceful coexistence. Over the following days, Marcus found himself seeing his own species through Lorelei's eyes. When she pointed out how humans would stop to help strangers with flat tires or lost pets, he began to notice these small kindnesses more often. When she marveled at the concept of public libraries, knowledge freely shared with all regardless of status or wealth, he remembered why he'd fallen in love with science in the first place. But she also witnessed humanity's darker aspects. A heated argument between neighbors over property lines troubled her deeply. They have so much space on this world, she said afterward, yet they fight over boundaries as if each meter were precious as life itself. Territory is important to humans, Marcus tried to explain. It represents security, identity, ownership. But they could share. They could negotiate. They could find solutions that benefit all parties. She paused, her hair appendages moving, and what he'd learned indicated deep thought. Yet they choose conflict instead. This concerns the practical faction among my people. Marcus realized he was walking a tightrope. Every human behavior Lorelei witnessed would be weighed against her people's survival needs. He began taking her to places where she could see humanity at its best. Volunteer centers, community gardens, the local children's hospital, where people donated their time to brighten sick children's days. Your species fascinates me, she said after watching volunteers read stories to young patients. You are capable of such cruelty to one another, yet also such profound compassion toward those who cannot offer anything in return. These sick children provide no benefit to the adults who comfort them, yet your people flock here to help. Maybe that's exactly the point, Marcus realized as he spoke. We're at our best when we're not thinking about what we can gain from helping others. That night, as they sat on his back porch watching the stars, Lorelei made a confession that changed everything between them. I must tell you something, Marcus. My feelings about this mission have become complicated. How so? When I volunteered to come here, I believed I was conducting an objective study of human nature. But living with you, learning from you, seeing your world through daily experience rather than distant observation, I find myself hoping that my report will favor cooperation, not because the evidence demands it, but because I want it to. Marcus turned to look at her profile against the starlight. Is that necessarily a bad thing? It means I may no longer be qualified to make this decision for my people, she said quietly. I have become emotionally invested in the outcome. My fellow Andorians would say I have been compromised. Or maybe you've just learned what it means to hope for something better than mere survival, Marcus suggested. Maybe that's exactly the perspective your people need. Lorelei was quiet for a long moment. There is something else, Marcus. My ship is not as damaged as I originally told you. I could repair it and contact my people at any time. Why haven't you? Because once I do, this time will be over. Once I make contact, everything changes for both our peoples. I am not ready for this to end. Marcus felt something shift in his chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the summer evening. Neither am I. The morning of the second week brought an unexpected crisis. Marcus was preparing breakfast when Lyrali stumbled into the kitchen, her usually luminous skin pale and flickering like a dying light bulb. Her hair appendages hung limp around her face, and when she tried to speak, only a whispered croak emerged. "What's wrong?" Marcus immediately shifted into medical mode, helping her to a chair and checking her vitals. Her temperature was spiking, and the patterns of ridges along her neck were flashing in rapid, erratic sequences. With effort, Lyrali managed to whisper, "Solar exposure. Your sun is different than ours." The radiation spectrum. I did not account for prolonged exposure. Marcus's mind raced through everything he knew about radiation poisoning and extraterrestrial biology, which was admittedly more theoretical than practical. "What do you need? How do I help you?" "My ship," she breathed. "Medical bay. Has treatment protocols, but what? If I use the ship's medical systems, it will automatically send a distress signal to my people. They will come for me immediately." Marcus understood the implications immediately. Her people would arrive to find her in the company of a human who had been harboring her for 2 weeks without reporting the contact. The careful study she'd been conducting would be compromised, her mission incomplete, and any hope of peaceful first contact would be replaced by suspicion and potential hostility. Is there any other way to treat this? Lyrali's skin flickered more rapidly, and Marcus could see she was struggling to remain conscious. "Perhaps, if we could create an environment similar to my homeworld's conditions, lower radiation, higher humidity, specific mineral content in the air." Marcus looked around his decidedly Earth-normal kitchen and made a decision. "I'm calling someone. A friend who can help." "No." Lyrali grabbed his arm weakly. "No others can know." "She won't betray us," Marcus said firmly. "Dr. Sarah Kim is my oldest friend and the best atmospheric engineer I know. If anyone can create artificial environmental conditions, it's her, and she owes me for covering for her during the Copenhagen conference incident." 20 minutes later, Sarah arrived at Marcus's door with a van full of equipment and the expression of barely controlled excitement. She was a small, energetic woman with prematurely gray hair and the kind of brilliant mind that could solve complex problems while others were still figuring out what questions to ask. "Marcus Chen, you beautiful genius," she said without preamble, wheeling a cart of atmospheric processors into his living room. "When you called and said you needed help creating an alien environment for a xenobiological emergency, I thought you'd finally snapped. But this—" She stopped dead when she saw Lyrali lying on the couch, her skin now flickering so rapidly it was almost strobing. "Dr. Kim," Marcus said formally, "I'd like you to meet Lyrali. Lyrali, this is Sarah, the person who's going to save your life." To her credit, Sarah only stared for about 30 seconds before her professional instincts kicked in. Radiation poisoning from solar exposure? What's her atmospheric requirement? As Marcus relayed Lyrali's whispered specifications, Sarah began setting up equipment with practiced efficiency. "I can give you something close but not perfect. We'll need to seal off your living room, pump in a nitrogen-heavy atmosphere with trace minerals, reduce the lighting to minimize any additional radiation exposure." "Will it work?" Marcus asked. "Ask me in 6 hours," Sarah replied, not looking up from her atmospheric readings. While Sarah worked, Marcus sat beside Lyrali, monitoring her condition and learning more about her physiology than any human had ever known. Her people had evolved on a world with a cooler, more stable star. Their skin was designed to absorb and process specific wavelengths of radiation that Earth's sun produced in harmful excess. "It's like a tree trying to photosynthesize under a nuclear reactor," Sarah observed during one of her equipment checks. "Her cellular structure is incredibly sophisticated, but it's calibrated for completely different energy inputs." As the artificial atmosphere began to take effect, Lyrali's condition slowly stabilized. Her skin stopped its frantic flickering and began to glow with a steadier, softer light. By evening, she was conscious and able to speak normally, though still weak. "You revealed my presence to another human," she said to Marcus, though her tone was more curious than accusatory. "I made a judgment call. Your life was more important than maintaining secrecy." Lyreley turned her attention to Sarah, who was making final adjustments to the atmospheric processors. And you, Dr. Kim, how do you feel about learning that you are not alone in the universe? Sarah paused her work and considered the question seriously. Professionally? It's the most exciting thing that's ever happened to me. Personally? I'm terrified and fascinated in equal measure. But mostly I'm honored that Marcus trusted me enough to share this with me. You do not wish to alert your authorities? Claim credit for this discovery? Hell no, Sarah said immediately. This is first contact we're talking about. This should be done right, with careful thought and planning, not with government bureaucrats and military protocols taking over. If Marcus thinks you need time to complete whatever mission brought you here, then that's good enough for me. Lyreley looked between the two humans with an expression of wonder. You would both risk your careers, possibly your freedom, to protect someone you barely know? That's what friends do, Sarah said simply. We protect each other. Over the next few days, as Lyreley recovered in the controlled environment, the three of them formed an unlikely team. Sarah proved to be fascinated by Andorian technology and eager to learn about their advanced atmospheric sciences. Lyreley was equally interested in human engineering approaches, particularly the way humans solve problems through collaboration rather than individual brilliance. Your species approaches challenges differently than mine, Lyreley observed during one of their evening conversations. Andorians typically assign the most qualified individual to solve a problem alone, but you instinctively form teams combining different areas of expertise. More minds, more solutions, Sarah said. Plus, it's more fun to solve problems with friends. Fun, Lyreley repeated the word thoughtfully. My people have lost the concept of fun in our focus on survival, yet you incorporate enjoyment into even serious work. This seems inefficient, yet your results suggest otherwise. Maybe efficiency isn't the only metric that matters, Marcus suggested. Maybe how we feel about our work affects the quality of what we produce. These discussions were interrupted on the fourth day, when Sarah's atmospheric sensors detected something unexpected. We've got company, she announced grimly, showing them readings on her tablet. Multiple aircraft approaching from the northwest, flying in formation and using some kind of stealth technology my equipment can barely detect. Lyreley's skin immediately paled. My people, someone has found me. How? Marcus asked. The atmospheric anomaly Sarah created to save my life. It would be detectable by Andorian sensors as completely unnatural for Earth. They have been searching for me since I failed to report in, and now they have found a clear sign of Andorian technology in use. Sarah was already beginning to shut down her equipment. How long do we have? Minutes, Lyreley said, struggling to her feet. I must go to them, explain what I have been doing, try to convince them that this contact was beneficial rather than a security breach. What will happen to us? Marcus asked, though he was afraid he already knew the answer. That depends on how my mission is perceived by the recovery team, Lyreley said sadly. If they believe I have been compromised or that you have learned too much about our technology and capabilities, they may decide that Earth is not ready for voluntary contact. And if Earth isn't ready for voluntary contact? Sarah asked. Lyreley met their eyes with an expression of profound regret. Then my people will begin preparing for involuntary contact instead. Outside, the sound of aircraft was growing louder, and Marcus realized that everything they had worked for, everything Lyreley had been trying to prove about humanity's potential for cooperation, was about to be put to the ultimate test. The question was whether 2 weeks of friendship and understanding would be enough to convince an alien species that humans were worth saving, or whether it would be seen as evidence that their advanced scout had been fatally compromised by emotion. The Andorian ships materialized in Marcus's backyard with the unsettling silence of advanced technology. One moment the sky was empty. The next, 3 sleek vessels hovered above his tomato plants like metallic teardrops catching the afternoon sun. They were beautiful in their alien geometry, their surfaces shifting between transparency and mirror-like reflection, as if they couldn't quite decide which state of matter to maintain. Lyreley stood at the living room window, her posture rigid with tension. The lead ship carries Commander Zephyrus, she said quietly. He leads the practical faction I told you about. If he is here personally, it means the situation is considered critical. What do we do? Sarah asked, her scientific excitement warring with very reasonable fear. We face this together, Marcus said, surprising himself with his calm. Lyrelei, you said you needed to prove that humans could be trusted partners. This is our chance to show them rather than tell them. The three of them walked outside, and Marcus felt a moment of surreal disorientation as alien beings stepped from their vessels onto his suburban lawn. The Andorians were taller than Lyrelei, with more pronounced ridges along their faces and necks, and their hair-like appendages moved in perfectly synchronized patterns that suggested some form of silent communication. Their leader, Commander Zephyros, approached with fluid grace that made each step look choreographed. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to absolute obedience. Scout Lyrelei, you have been missing for 14 Earth days. Your failure to report triggered emergency protocols. Explain your status. Lyrelei stepped forward, her own posture straightening into what Marcus recognized as military bearing. Commander, I have been conducting extended behavioral analysis of human subjects as per mission parameters. My cover story required maintaining prolonged contact to gather meaningful data. Zephyros's golden eyes flicked to Marcus and Sarah, studying them with an intensity that made Marcus feel like a specimen under a microscope. These humans know of your true nature? Yes, Commander. This is a serious breach of reconnaissance protocol. You were instructed to observe, not interact directly. With respect, Commander, observation alone could not provide the data our people require. I have learned more about human nature in 2 weeks of cohabitation than 3 years of distant surveillance revealed. Another Andorian, smaller than Zephyros but with more intricate ridge patterns, stepped forward. Scout Lyrelei, preliminary scans indicate you have been exposed to harmful radiation levels. Your judgment may be compromised by physiological stress. Dr. Velix is correct, Zephyros said. You will return with us immediately for medical evaluation and debriefing. These humans will need to be processed. Marcus felt Sarah tense beside him, and he knew they were about to lose everything. But then Lyrelei did something unexpected. She moved to stand between the Andorian landing party and her human companions. Commander, I request permission to present my findings before any decisions are made regarding these humans. Your findings can be reviewed during debriefing aboard our ship. Not these findings, sir. I have discovered something about human nature that can only be demonstrated, not described. Lyrelei's voice carried a new confidence that Marcus had never heard before. Grant me 1 hour to show you what I have learned, and I guarantee you will understand why the cooperative approach is not only preferable, but necessary for our people's survival. Zephyros was silent for a long moment, his hair appendages moving in what Marcus was beginning to recognize as a sign of deep consideration among the Andorians. Very well, 1 hour. But if your demonstration does not satisfy our concerns, these humans will be mind-wiped and relocated, and you will face charges of mission compromise. Understood. Commander? Marcus leaned toward Lyrelei and whispered, What are you planning? Something that will either save both our species or doom us all, she whispered back. Then louder she said, I propose we recreate the scenario that brought us together, but in reverse. I want to show you how humans respond when they discover someone in need. 20 minutes later, Dr. Velix lay in Marcus's garden in the same spot where Lyrelei had crashed 2 weeks ago. The Andorian doctor had reluctantly agreed to participate in the demonstration, using technology to simulate unconsciousness and injury. To any observer, it would appear that an alien being had crashed and needed help. Now what? Zephyros asked skeptically. Now we wait, Lyrelei said, and watch how humans respond to discovering an injured stranger. It didn't take long. Mrs. Patterson from next door was the first to notice something unusual in the chen yard. Marcus watched through his kitchen window as the elderly woman approached the garden cautiously, then gasped and hurried back toward her house, not to hide, but to grab her first aid kit. Within minutes, she had returned with her kit and her cell phone, kneeling beside the unconscious Dr. Velix with the practiced efficiency of someone who had raised 5 children and managed countless neighborhood crises. She didn't hesitate despite the alien's obviously non-human appearance, checking for signs of life and gently examining the simulated injuries. She's calling for help, Sarah observed as Mrs. Patterson spoke rapidly into her phone. She's requesting medical assistance and telling the dispatcher that the victim appears to be in some kind of costume, but that the injuries look real. More neighbors began arriving. First Jim from across the street, then the Martinez family from 2 houses down. None of them fled or called military authorities. Instead, they formed a protective circle around Dr. Velix, offering blankets, water, and gentle words of comfort even though they couldn't understand if the alien could hear them. "Look at their faces," Lirelai said quietly to Commander Zephyros. "Do you see fear? Hostility? Desire to exploit or harm?" "I see. Concern," Zephyros admitted grudgingly. "But this is a small sample. Surely not all humans would respond this way." As if summoned by his skepticism, the sound of sirens filled the air. Local police and emergency medical services arrived within minutes, and Marcus held his breath as he watched uniformed officers approach the scene. This would be the real test. How would authority figures react to an obvious alien presence? The lead EMT, a young woman with kind eyes and steady hands, immediately took charge of the situation. She thanked the neighbors for their help, gently moved them back to give her room to work, and began a professional medical assessment of Dr. Velix. When her equipment gave strange readings, she didn't panic or call for military backup. She adapted, using her training and instincts to provide the best care she could for a patient unlike any she'd ever encountered. "Ma'am," the police officer said to Mrs. Patterson, "do you have any idea where this individual came from?" "I just found them like this," Mrs. Patterson replied. "I don't care if they're from Mars, they need help. And that's all that matters." Commander Zephyros's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, and Marcus saw something that looked like surprise in his golden eyes. They are not trying to claim credit for the discovery. They are not attempting to exploit the situation for personal gain. They are simply helping. "That's what humans do," Marcus said softly. "When we see someone in need, our first instinct is to help. It doesn't matter if they're strangers, if they look different, or if there's nothing in it for us. We help because it's the right thing to do." Dr. Velix, who had been monitoring the entire situation through subtle sensors, spoke without opening his eyes. "Commander, their medical professional is attempting to treat my simulated injuries using techniques that show remarkable adaptability. She has modified her protocols to account for non-human physiology without any training or preparation. This suggests cognitive flexibility and compassionate problem-solving." "The crowd is growing," Sarah observed. "But look at their behavior. They're not trying to get closer for a better look. They're maintaining a respectful distance while offering support. Someone brought coffee for the EMTs. Another person is directing traffic away from the scene to give the medical team space to work." Lirelai stepped closer to Zephyros, her voice urgent but controlled. "Commander, this is what I discovered during my extended observation. Humans possess something my reports could never convey: an instinctive drive to protect and care for others, even at personal cost. This goes beyond survival strategy or pack behavior. It is fundamental to their nature. And you believe this makes them suitable allies for a desperate people facing extinction?" Zephyros asked. "I believe it makes them the kind of allies our people need to remember how to be," Lirelai replied. "We have become so focused on survival that we have forgotten why survival matters. Humans can teach us to value life not just for its utility, but for its inherent worth." Commander Zephyros watched as the EMT team carefully loaded Dr. Velix onto a stretcher, still talking gently to their unconscious patient and promising that everything would be okay. The neighbors were already making plans to check on the mysterious visitor once he recovered, and Mrs. Patterson was asking the police officer for updates. "Signal Dr. Velix to end the simulation," Zephyros said finally. "We have seen enough." As Dr. Velix awakened and mysteriously recovered from his injuries, claiming he felt much better and needed no further medical attention, Marcus watched the human. The conversation that followed would later be remembered as the moment when 2 civilizations chose cooperation over conquest, though none of them realized the historical significance at the time. Commander Zephyros, Dr. Velix, and the third Andorian, introduced as Engineer Thane, sat around Marcus's kitchen table while Lirelai made introductions and Sarah frantically took notes on everything she observed. "Before we proceed," Zephyros said, his formal tone softening slightly, "I must understand the full scope of what has transpired here. Scout Lirelai, your mission was reconnaissance with minimal contact. Instead, you have established a cohabitation arrangement with humans, revealed our existence, shared our technology, and influenced their perceptions of our people. Explain your reasoning." Lirelai's posture remained confident as she replied, "Commander, Our standard reconnaissance protocols assume that we are observing primitive beings who lack the capacity for meaningful cultural exchange. But humans are not primitive. They are simply different. Their approach to problem solving, their social structures, their fundamental values, these cannot be understood through distant observation alone. And what, precisely, have you learned that justifies such deviation from protocol? Marcus watched as Lyrelei gathered her thoughts, knowing that her answer might determine the future relationship between their species. I have learned that humans possess a quality we Andorians have lost in our focus on survival. They choose hope over fear as their primary motivator. When faced with challenges, their instinct is to adapt and collaborate, rather than to dominate or eliminate obstacles. Dr. Velix leaned forward with scientific interest. Can you provide specific examples? When I crashed and was injured, Marcus could have reported my presence to authorities, which would have guaranteed him recognition and potential reward. Instead, he chose to help me heal and learn about my circumstances. When I became ill from solar radiation, Dr. Kim risked her career to provide medical assistance to someone she had never met. When you arrived to retrieve me, they both chose to face potential consequences rather than abandon me to face your judgment alone. Engineer Thane, who had been silent until now, spoke in a voice that carried the practical weight of technical expertise. These are individual examples from a small sample group. How can you extrapolate broader behavioral patterns from such limited data? Sarah looked up from her notes. Actually, I can answer that. What you just witnessed in the garden wasn't an isolated incident. It's completely typical human behavior. Emergency response statistics show that civilians consistently prioritize helping accident victims over personal safety. Blood donation centers operate purely on voluntary participation with no compensation. Disaster response relies heavily on volunteer organizations. Humans regularly risk themselves to help strangers because that's how our social bonds evolved. But you also wage wars, exploit resources, and compete destructively among your own species, Zephyros pointed out. How do you reconcile these contradictions? Marcus had been thinking about this question for 2 weeks. We're not perfect. We make mistakes, sometimes terrible ones, but our capacity for growth, for changing our minds when presented with new information, for feeling genuine remorse and working to do better, that's what makes us adaptable. We can learn from our failures in ways that many species apparently cannot. Our psychological profiles of humanity suggested a species driven primarily by tribal loyalty and resource competition, Dr. Velix said. Yet your behavior toward Lyrelei demonstrates loyalty extending beyond your own species. This was not predicted by our models. Maybe your models were based on observing us during conflicts and crises, Sarah suggested. But you've been watching us from a distance, probably focusing on our governments and military organizations. That's like judging Andorians based solely on your military protocols. It gives you one aspect of who you are, but not the complete picture. Lyrelei nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. I learned more about human nature by living in this house, watching Marcus interact with his neighbors, observing how strangers help each other in everyday situations, than all our surveillance data could provide. Commander Zephyros was quiet for several minutes, his hair appendages moving in complex patterns that Lyrelei had taught Marcus, indicated deep contemplation among Andorians. Finally, he spoke. You present compelling observations, but we face practical realities that cannot be resolved through good intentions alone. Our homeworld will become uninhabitable within 50 Earth years. We have a population of nearly 2 billion individuals who require relocation. Even with the best cooperative intentions, Earth cannot simply absorb that many refugees without massive disruption to both our peoples. Then, let's figure out how to solve that problem together, Marcus said. What are your people's specific needs? What resources do you require? What technologies do you possess that might benefit both species? Engineer Thane consulted a device that appeared to be some sort of advanced tablet. Our primary requirements are atmospheric compatibility, which Earth provides, and stable energy sources to maintain our civilization's infrastructure. Our homeworld's unique mineral composition allowed for certain technologies that Earth's geology cannot support. What kind of technologies? Sarah asked, her scientific curiosity overriding diplomatic caution. Crystalline computing matrices, atmospheric processors capable of terraforming entire continents, bioregenerative agriculture that can restore poisoned soil, technologies your world could benefit from if properly implemented. Marcus felt a spark of excitement. You're talking about technologies that could help solve Earth's own environmental challenges. Climate change, pollution, food scarcity, these are problems we're struggling with ourselves. But implementation would require massive cooperation between our peoples, Dr. Velix pointed out. Cultural integration on a scale never before attempted. The potential for conflict and misunderstanding would be enormous, or the potential for something unprecedented in the history of both our species, Lyrelai said softly. A true partnership between worlds where both peoples benefit and grow stronger together. That is a beautiful dream, Zephyros said. But dreams do not save dying worlds. No, but plans do, Sarah said firmly. And we've got some of the best minds from both species sitting right here at this table. Why don't we start working on a real plan instead of just talking about why it might not work? What followed was the most intensive brainstorming session of Marcus's life. For 6 hours, they mapped out the challenges and opportunities of large-scale Andorian human cooperation. The Andorians needed new homes, but they possessed technologies that could help heal Earth's damaged ecosystems. Humans needed solutions to climate change and resource depletion, but they had vast areas of underutilized land and established social infrastructures for integrating diverse populations. Ocean settlements, Engineer Thane suggested at one point. Andorians are naturally adapted for higher humidity and could thrive in floating cities anchored over Earth's deepest ocean trenches. We could provide the technology to build such settlements while creating minimal impact on existing human territories. And Andorian atmospheric processors could help restore damaged land areas, Sarah added excitedly. The Sahara Desert, areas destroyed by mining, regions affected by industrial pollution, they could be transformed into productive territory for both species. Dr. Velix was running calculations on his device. Gradual integration over a 20-year period could allow for cultural adaptation and technological transfer without overwhelming either civilization's capacity for change. As dawn approached, they had outlined a preliminary framework for what they were calling the Dual World Initiative, a comprehensive plan for Andorian resettlement that would benefit both species through technological and cultural exchange. This is all theoretical, Zephyros warned. Though his tone had lost its earlier skepticism, implementation would require approval from both the Andorian collective and Earth's various governing bodies. The political challenges alone could prove insurmountable. Then we start small, Marcus said. A pilot program. A few Andorian families working with human communities to test integration approaches. Real-world data that proves the concept. Works before we ask anyone to commit to larger changes. Lyrelai looked around the table at the 3 Andorians and 2 humans who had spent the night reimagining the future of 2 worlds. Commander, I request permission to extend my mission here to oversee implementation of a preliminary integration study. You wish to remain on Earth? I wish to be part of building something that neither of our species could achieve alone, she said. Something that proves survival and growth are not mutually exclusive. Something that honors both our people's deepest values. Commander Zephyros studied each face around the table before responding. Very well. Dr. Velix and Engineer Thane will return to our fleet to present these proposals to the Collective Council. You, Scout Lyrelai, will remain here with a small support team to begin preliminary integration studies. Dr. Chen and Dr. Kim will serve as our primary human liaisons. What about the secrecy issue? Sarah asked. Eventually, more people are going to have to know what's happening. 3 months into the pilot program, Marcus's house had become the unofficial headquarters of the most important secret in human history. The basement had been converted into a communications center linking Earth to the Andorian fleet, while the garage housed not only Lyrelai's scout ship, but also a small fabrication unit that had been delivered by stealth, cargo vessel under cover of darkness. The integration study had expanded far beyond Marcus's original expectations. What had started as a single Andorian living with one human family had evolved into a carefully managed network of 12 Andorian volunteers placed with human families across 3 countries. Each placement was monitoring specific aspects of cultural compatibility, technological integration, and social adaptation. The results are better than we dared hope, Lyrelai reported during their weekly video conference with Commander Zephyros and the Collective Council. Integration success rates are approaching 90%. with most challenges stemming from minor cultural misunderstandings that resolve quickly once direct communication is established. Sarah, who had taken leave from her university position to serve as full-time program coordinator, pulled up holographic displays showing their collected data. The technological exchange benefits are already exceeding projections. Andorian atmospheric processing has increased crop yields by 30% in test areas, while human manufacturing techniques have improved Andorian equipment efficiency by 15%. Dr. Velix, participating from the fleet, looked pleased with the medical data. Health compatibility is optimal. Andorian immune systems are adapting to Earth's biological environment more successfully than predicted, while humans show no negative reactions to extended Andorian contact. But Marcus knew the real test wasn't in the data, it was in the stories. Like the Hendersons in Nebraska, whose Andorian guest Kaleth had helped them save their farm from drought using microatmospheric processors. Or Dr. Maria Santos in São Paulo, whose collaboration with the Andorian healer Thyra was revolutionizing treatment for autoimmune disorders. Each placement had become its own small miracle of cooperation. However, Commander Zephyros's voice carried a note of concern. "We are approaching the limits of what can be accomplished in secrecy. Our observers report increased curiosity from your government intelligence agencies. Someone has noticed the pattern of atmospheric anomalies and technological advances." This was the news Marcus had been dreading. How long before we're discovered? Our analysts estimate 6 to 8 weeks before your governments begin asking questions we cannot answer without revealing our presence. Then it's time for the next phase, Marcus said, though the words felt like stepping off a cliff. We need to begin preparing for official disclosure. The plan they had developed for controlled revelation was ambitious and terrifying in equal measure. Rather than wait for governments to discover them, they would orchestrate a carefully managed first contact that demonstrated the benefits of cooperation from the very beginning. The World Science Congress is meeting in Geneva next month, Sarah said. 5,000 of Earth's leading scientists, researchers, and policymakers in one location. If we could arrange for simultaneous demonstration of Andorian technology at multiple sites around the world, followed by a coordinated revelation at the Congress, a global coming out party, Marcus mused. Reveal everything at once to everyone with immediate proof of beneficial intent. Lyralay's expression showed both excitement and apprehension. The risk is enormous. If your species reacts with fear or hostility, it could undermine everything we've worked toward. But if we wait much longer, the revelation won't be on our terms, Sarah pointed out. It'll be a government cover-up, military response, all the worst-case scenarios we've been trying to avoid. Over the next 2 weeks, they began implementing what they privately called Operation Open Sky. Andorian volunteers around the world prepared demonstration sites where their technology would solve immediate, visible problems, cleaning polluted rivers, restoring damaged ecosystems, providing free energy to impoverished communities. Each demonstration would be accompanied by simple, peaceful contact with local populations, followed by a globally coordinated announcement. Meanwhile, Marcus and Sarah worked with sympathetic colleagues to arrange for the World Science Congress presentation. Dr. Elizabeth Warren, the Congress president and an old friend of Marcus's, had agreed to provide them with a speaking slot without asking too many questions about the nature of their breakthrough announcement. "You're sure about this, Marcus?" Dr. Warren asked during a secure video call. "Because whatever you're planning, it's generated some very interesting chatter in very high places. I've had 3 different government agencies call asking about your presentation. Elizabeth, I promise you this will be the most important scientific announcement in human history. Just be prepared for something unprecedented. Define unprecedented. The kind that changes everything we thought we knew about our place in the universe." The night before Operation Open Sky, Marcus found himself unable to sleep. He walked through his house looking at all the changes that had occurred since that night 3 months ago, when he'd found an unconscious alien in his garden. The walls were covered with charts showing integration progress, atmospheric readings, and technological schematics that represented the combined knowledge of 2 civilizations. Lyrailai found him in the kitchen at 3 a.m., staring at a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. "Second thoughts?" she asked gently. "Thousands of them," Marcus admitted. "What if we're wrong? What if humans aren't as ready for this as we think? What if your people decide we're too risky after all? Lyrelei sat beside him at the kitchen table where they'd shared so many conversations over the past months. Do you remember what you told me the first night I was here? You said that some discoveries are too important to be filtered through committees and protocols. I remember. This is still true. Yes, we are taking an enormous risk. But the alternative is to let fear make our decisions for us. And I have learned from watching humans for these months that your species does its best work when it chooses hope over fear. Even when hope seems crazy? Especially then. Lyrelei reached across the table and took his hand. Marcus, 3 months ago, I was prepared to recommend that my people consider Earth as a resource to be managed rather than a partner to be embraced. Now I cannot imagine a future that does not include both our peoples working together as equals. That transformation happened because you were brave enough to help a stranger, and wise enough to trust that cooperation could yield better results than isolation. The next morning, Operation Open Sky commenced at precisely 12 GMT. In São Paulo, Thyra and Dr. Santos announced their breakthrough in autoimmune treatment at a packed medical conference, revealing Thyra's true nature, as they demonstrated healing techniques that had been impossible the week before. In Kenya, Andorian atmospheric processors began cleaning decades of pollution from Lake Victoria, while local officials watched in amazement. In Nebraska, the Hendersons held a press conference at their restored farm, introducing Caliph to the world as the friend who had saved their land. All across the globe, 12 similar revelations occurred simultaneously, each one accompanied by immediate tangible benefits to local human populations. Social media exploded with videos, photographs, and first-hand accounts of peaceful aliens working alongside humans to solve real-world problems. At the World Science Congress in Geneva, Marcus stood before 5,000 of humanity's brightest minds and began the presentation that would change history. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished colleagues, he began, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was about to reveal. Today marks the beginning of a new chapter in the story of life in our universe. For the past 3 months, with the knowledge and support of the Global Scientific Council, we have been conducting the most important research project in human history, a controlled study of human-alien integration. The auditorium erupted in shocked murmurs, but Marcus continued. I would like you to meet my colleague and friend, Lyrelei of the Andorian Collective, who has been living and working with human families to demonstrate that peaceful coexistence between species is not only possible, but beneficial to both civilizations. Lyrelei stepped onto the stage, her natural luminescence visible even under the bright conference lighting. The auditorium fell silent as 5,000 brilliant minds tried to process what they were seeing. People of Earth, Lyrelei said, her voice carrying clearly through the hall's audio system. My people face extinction on our dying homeworld. We came to your world seeking refuge, but we have found something far more valuable: partnership. In 3 months of living among you, we have learned that humans possess qualities our civilization has lost in our struggle for survival. You have reminded us that life is worth preserving not just for its own sake, but for its potential to grow, to hope, and to create beauty in the darkness. Marcus stepped forward again. The demonstrations you are seeing worldwide today represent just the beginning of what our species can accomplish together. We invite you to help us prove that cooperation between civilizations can create outcomes neither could achieve alone. 5 years after Operation Open Sky, Marcus stood on the observation deck of New Harmony, humanity's first joint orbital station, watching Earth turn slowly below him. The planet looked different now. The brown scars of pollution had given way to green patches where Andorian atmospheric processors had restored damaged ecosystems, while glowing nodes of light marked the locations of the new fusion crystal, power plants that had replaced fossil fuel infrastructure across 6 continents. Hard to believe it all started with a crash landing in your tomato garden, Sarah said, joining him at the viewing port. She wore the insignia of the Interspecies Council, her role as Director of Cultural Integration having evolved far beyond anything they could have imagined during those early days. Sometimes I still wake up expecting to find it was all a dream, Marcus admitted, that I'll go downstairs and find my kitchen empty, my life normal, and the universe a much lonelier place. Through the station's transparent aluminum walls, they could see one of the massive Andorian Arc ships approaching Earth's orbit. The vessel was graceful despite its enormous size, designed to carry 50,000 refugees from their dying homeworld to new homes among the stars. This was the 7th such ship to arrive in the past 2 years, and each one carried families who would be integrated into human communities through the program that had grown from their small pilot study. The integration statistics from the latest arrivals are remarkable, Sarah said, consulting her tablet. 94% successful placement rate, with most challenges resolved within 30 days of arrival. The host families actually request to participate now. We have waiting lists in most regions. Marcus nodded, remembering the early days when finding 12 families willing to participate had seemed impossible. The transformation in human attitude toward the Andorians had been one of the most encouraging discoveries of the entire program. When people saw the tangible benefits of cooperation, cleaner air, restored farmland, revolutionary medical treatments, unlimited clean energy, fear had quickly given way to enthusiasm. Dr. Chen, Dr. Kim, a familiar voice called from across the observation deck. They turned to see Lyrelai approaching, but she was no longer the injured refugee Marcus had found in his garden. As the appointed ambassador between worlds, she carried herself with confidence and authority, though her smile remained as warm as ever. The council meeting is about to begin. The Interspecies Council had been established 2 years after first contact to manage the growing complexity of human-Andorian cooperation. What had begun as emergency refugee assistance had evolved into the most ambitious cooperative venture in the history of either species. Joint research projects were revolutionizing science and technology. Collaborative art forms were emerging that neither species could have created alone, and the children of both peoples were growing up bilingual in ways that transcended language. As they walked through the station's corridors, Marcus marveled at how normal the sight of humans and Andorians working together had become. In the hydroponics labs, mixed teams were developing agricultural techniques that could feed both species on worlds they had never seen. In the engineering workshops, human creativity was combining with Andorian precision to design spacecraft that would carry their joint civilization to distant stars. Today's agenda includes the final approval for the Perseus Colony project, Lyrelai said as they entered the council chambers. If approved, it will be the first world specifically terraformed for joint human-Andorian settlement. The council chamber itself was a marvel of cooperative design. The lighting could be adjusted to accommodate both species' visual spectrums. The atmosphere was perfectly balanced for both physiologies, and the architecture incorporated aesthetic elements that appealed to both human and Andorian sensibilities. Representatives from both species sat together rather than in opposing blocks, their conversations conducted in the hybrid language that had naturally evolved from their constant interaction. Commander Zephyros, now serving as the Andorian Deputy Council Leader, called the session to order. Fellow counselors, we gather today to consider humanity's most ambitious proposal yet, the establishment of our first joint colony world. Dr. Elizabeth Warren, representing Earth's scientific community, stood to present the proposal. The Perseus system offers a unique opportunity. 3 worlds capable of supporting life, each requiring different terraforming approaches that play to our respective strengths. We propose a 50-year project that would establish 3 distinct but interconnected colonies, each serving as a testing ground for different models of interspecies cooperation. Marcus listened as the technical details were presented, but his mind wandered to the larger implications. 5 years ago, both species had been focused on survival. Humans struggling with environmental collapse, Andorians facing extinction on their dying world. Now they were planning to build new worlds together, to spread their combined civilization across the galaxy. The cultural integration studies show remarkable promise, Sarah reported during her portion of the presentation. Children raised in mixed communities demonstrate enhanced problem-solving abilities, improved emotional intelligence, and natural proficiency in both technological and philosophical thinking. They represent the future of both our species, not as humans or Andorians, but as something new. The debate that followed was spirited but collegial, with representatives raising practical concerns about logistics, resource allocation, and governance structures. Marcus was struck by how naturally the 2 species had learned to work together, how their different perspectives had become complementary rather than conflicting. When the vote was called, The result was unanimous. The Perseus colony project would proceed. After the formal session ended, Marcus found himself in the station's botanical garden, a space that had become his favorite retreat during his frequent stays at New Harmony. The garden combined plants from both worlds, creating an ecosystem that could only exist through cooperation between species. Lyrelei found him there, as she often did when he needed to think. "Regrets?" she asked, settling beside him on a bench surrounded by flowers that glowed softly in response to their presence. "None at all," Marcus said, and realized he meant it completely. "I was just thinking about that conversation we had the night before Operation Open. Sky, you asked me if I was having second thoughts. And you said you had. Thousands of them. But you know what I realize now? The second thoughts weren't about whether we were doing the right thing. They were about whether we were brave enough to see it through." Marcus looked around at the impossible garden they sat in, at the diverse group of beings working together beyond the transparent walls, at the stars where their combined peoples would soon build new homes. "It turns out we were. Both our species were," Lyrelei agreed. "Humans chose to trust despite their fear, and Andorians chose to hope despite their desperation. Together we created something neither could have achieved alone." Through the garden's viewing window, Marcus could see Earth hanging in space like a blue-green jewel, its surface now marked with the geometric patterns of atmospheric processors and the soft glow of fusion crystal cities. Beyond it, Andorian ships moved in steady streams, bringing more refugees to their new homes and carrying mixed crews to explore distant worlds. The children born on the Perseus colonies will never know a universe where humans and Andorians were separate peoples, Lyrelei mused. To them, cooperation between species will be as natural as breathing. "Maybe that's the real measure of success," Marcus said. "Not that we learn to work together, but that we're creating a future where working together is the only way anyone can imagine living." A soft chime indicated the station's evening rotation was beginning, and the garden's bioluminescent plants began their nightly display of synchronized light patterns. Marcus watched the colors dance across Lyrelei's face and remembered the first night he'd seen that same ethereal glow in his backyard garden. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked. "The simplicity of before? When the biggest decision was whether to report finding an alien in your tomatoes." Lyrelei laughed, a sound like wind chimes that had become one of Marcus's favorite sounds in any language. "Do you know what I miss? The certainty that we understood our place in the universe, but what we gained in return, the complexity, the possibilities, the knowledge that we're part of something larger than ourselves. It's worth every moment of uncertainty." As they sat together in the impossible garden, watching Earth and stars and the ships that carried their combined peoples toward an unimaginable future, Marcus reflected on the strange path that had brought them to this moment. An alien guest who had insisted on staying, a human who had been brave enough to let her, a friendship that had become a partnership that had become a new way of existence itself. The universe, it turned out, was a much more welcoming place when you were willing to share it. And in the gardens of New Harmony, under the light of human and Andorian stars, the future continued to grow toward possibilities that neither species could have dreamed of alone. The woman who had been an alien guest had indeed stayed, and in staying had helped both their peoples discover what it truly meant to be at home among the stars.